one of the fascinations of this strangest of Christmases is that actually it does bring you quite close to what the Puritans are worried about.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Lockdown TV from UnHerd. Today is our Christmas special. Yes, we have a special fireplace crackling in the corner with stockings on it, and we are in our special Christmas finest. So happy Christmas to you. And here to talk about it with us is none other than Tom Holland. Hi, Tom.
Hello.
So Tom, just to introduce you to our viewers who might not know, you are a famous historian and writer, author of the blockbuster bestseller Dominion, which is a history of Christianity and the effect that's had on all of us, and also host of a new podcast called The Rest is History.
The Rest is History, yes.
Let's get straight into the question of the day. Do you still feel like Christmas is a sort of Christian festival in Western democracies like the one we're living in? Do you sense that?
Well, I mean, I think that anxiety about that is in itself a very Christian tradition. So it essentially, I mean, interestingly, in the early centuries, so early medieval period, scholars like Bede, great Anglo-Saxon scholar, is completely unconcerned by the echoes of the pagan in Christian celebration. So not just Christmas, but also Easter, which Bede says is named after a pagan goddess. He's not worried about this because it proves the triumph of Christianity over this pagan dispensation. There is no issue with the fact for Bede that Christmas is celebrated in the depths of winter as pagans have celebrated it, because for Bede, the pagan celebrations in winter are just a kind of pallid foreshadowing of the truth of Christ's birth. And so therefore echoes of pagan,
it wasn't an echo so much as a sort of advance,
a kind
notice.
of a foreshadowing.
Yeah.
But by the time you get to the Reformation in England, and you get Puritans in particular are very, very anxious about the way in which they see the Roman Church as having failed to root up the brambles and nettles of paganism. And worse, in many ways, they think that...
So they see all of the sort of angels and the Virgin Mary and all of these kind of other seeming deities are complexify the sort of relationship between individual and God. Is that what they're
not worried
about
the angels, and they're not worried about the Virgin Mary because that's in Scripture. And Protestants are very keen on Scripture. You go to Scripture basically to know what's proper. It's all the other accretions. So it's the saints certainly, but also the general sense that at Christmas, the tradition of open house, of offering hospitality to people, of giving presents, all of which it seems to me clearly derive, and you can see this in the kind of early medieval traditions. So there's this tradition of generosity at Christmas that absolutely arises from the kind of imperatives of the way that Christians understand their duty to the poor.
Puritans didn't like it.
But I think by the time you get to the 17th century, this sense has been blurred, and Puritans read about the way that the Romans celebrated their gods, and they draw the analogies, and they're nervous that actually these celebrations are being held not for Christian reasons, but for pagan reasons. And it's the Puritans really who are the first people to draw up this thesis that Christian celebrations derive from the pagan.
So they're not much fun, these Puritans of the 17th century, are they? How close to cancelling Christmas did they get?
Okay. I mean, that is the stereotype. And although Cromwell didn't cancel Christmas, this was the prohibition against Christmas festivities long preceded him in the kind of the early days of the Civil War from Parliament. The idea that Cromwell and the Protectorate consisted of people rushing around, stopping people having fun, cancelling everything, is absolutely a stereotype that continues to have enormous play, and I think has a kind of political resonance even to this day, because I think that I think a huge reason why the government is so determined not to cancel Christmas, to allow people to have this kind of brief window of fun, is that they don't want to be cast as Cromwell. They don't want to be kind of cast as finger-wagging Puritans, stopping people having fun. But I think equally, one of the fascinations of this strangest of Christmases is that actually it does bring you quite close to what the Puritans are worried about, because just as people now who want to really rein in Christmas are doing it for the best of reasons, they were doing it because they think that it will save lives and it will be for the good of society as a whole. That's exactly the motivation of the Puritans. Puritans want to cancel Christmas not because they just want to have fun. Cromwell was a great enthusiast for music and for dancing. I mean, he was aware that the good things in life are good, but Puritans were anxious that celebrating Christmas as they saw it in a pagan way would doom those who did it to eternal death. And
so they were worried for their spiritual health rather than their physical health.
But it's about health in both cases. It's about a desire to, not needlessly see people lost to death. And I think that the experience of this Christmas perhaps enables us to have a kind of sense of where the Puritans were coming from in a kind of a more emotive way than perhaps we've had for centuries.
I mean, it is an amazing parallel. And the Puritans didn't have social media, but had they, one can sort of imagine that they would have been quite militant on social media and quite quick to judge and to prosecute virtue in the kind of public square. Should we look at those people who are most sort of censorious and moral high groundish today, most clear, most black and white about what is right and wrong, and most kind of comfortable judging others as today's Puritans?
Well, you say that the Puritans didn't have social media, but they particularly after the outbreak of the Civil War, and then even more with the abolition of the monarchy, you do have a kind of liberation of the printing presses, and so pamphlets do absolutely churn out. So kind of, it's kind of the 17th century equivalent of social media. Suddenly all kinds of people are able to communicate and have expressed their views in ways that they were not able to previously. And I guess that as today on Twitter or Facebook, of course, it's the people who feel strongest about issues who tend to be most active. And it's those whose views perhaps are the starkest, are the most sharply defined, that are able to express themselves with the most...
But do you think the Puritan comparison is fair? I mean, it sort of feels like there's always been some type of personality that quite almost enjoys a kind of clarity of purpose that comes with moral condemnation.
Yes.
Were they the same people in Cromwell's day, do you think, that now they're just wearing different clothes and worrying about different issues?
I think so. I mean, I think that to the degree that a feeling of moral superiority can be a source of pleasure, that's clearly true. But I think that in both cases it's reductive to assume that that is all it's about, because just as today lots of people are motivated to take a moral stand on social media by deeply held principles, the same is absolutely true of Puritans, who in many ways are the kind of the most, I find them kind of very moving, most movingly introspective of people, because to be a Puritan is constantly to look into your soul and to ask yourself, am I measuring up? Am I fallen? Am I redeemed? Have I received grace? And you kind of have to, unless, you can judge others and you can judge society, but you can only do that if you are also judging yourself constantly.
It takes a lot to be a good Puritan.
Yes, it does. Absolutely, it does. And I think that at its most admirable, you see the same thing on social media today, that there are, of course, all kinds of blowhards. There are all kinds of hypocrites. There are all kinds of people who enjoy the sound of their own voice. And I'm sure that is true now as it was in the 17th century. But equally, there are people who examine themselves with great care and kind of are concerned to do the best, that they can. And I think that that is also a part of it. And I think that just as in the 17th century, if you take it seriously, if you take these anxieties seriously, then actually you can gain a great deal from it. Same is true today. I mean, you've just got to...
At what point does that same instinct, which is a virtuous one and can be an incredibly rewarding one for society, flip into becoming a tyrannical instinct? I mean, if we look at, the protectorate ended and life came back with double vigour. The prohibition era of the 20s was followed by a, partying and everybody celebrating. This year, at least more than any time in my lifetime, has felt a little bit like that suddenly the whole of society is gripped by rules and fears and moral judgment is everywhere. And I wonder whether there's a sort of coiled spring effect, that when it's finally over, life will come back double.
I'm sure there is. I mean, I'm sure that the vast majority of people must be yearning to get back to normality. And I would have thought that purely looking at it economically, there must be vast amounts of cash kind of frozen in accounts that people who've kept their jobs haven't been able to spend.
This might sound like a reach now, and you can stop me if you think I'm trying to make too grand sweeps of history here, but your book, Dominion, is all about the Christian inheritance and how the final chapter of it is called Woke. You point that these kind of instincts have sort of morphed in through liberalism and secularism through to where we are today. And it just seems almost ironic that the voices now who are most vociferously in favour of cancelling Christmas, literally, I mean, that's been a phrase that everyone's tabloid newspapers have been putting on their front pages for decades and has never actually been true, but this year it sort of is true. Those voices are perhaps animated by a spirit that derives from Christianity.
I think so, and I think it kind of comes in various traditions. So I think there is a kind of Puritan strain, kind of Protestantism that has in many ways been bled of God, but retains the sense of moral earnestness. And I think a lot of, particularly on the left, that strain of moral Puritanism, and I use Puritanism, not as a pejorative, I think absolutely animates it. But I think also another strain is the way in which a concern for the sick has been an enduring Christian tradition. And it's Christians really who established the idea that you should have a kind of mass healthcare. Hospitals that are in which people care for the sick, no matter how rich or poor they are, is an inheritance that we in the modern welfare state have received from Christianity. And in fact, there's a sense in which the welfare state, and particularly the National Health Service, is a nationalisation of responsibilities that the churches previously exercised. And I think that is why one of the things that I've noticed over the course of this year is actually how absent the churches have been. In previous experiences of pandemic, they played very, very central roles. That role over the course of this pandemic has essentially been played by the health service. Churches literally closed their doors.
Out of interest, is that the first time that's happened?
I think since the interdict, to be honest.
The interdict.
So King John,
sort of year
his
are we
bust
talking?
up with Innocent III in the first part of the 13th century.
A long time ago.
A long time ago, when the Pope stopped services going on. So I think, So I think that's been a real feature of this, is that the churches have basically been kind of absent from the discourse, and so public devotion, you might even call it superstition, has been focused on the National Health Service. So as you walk around London, I've seen in windows, all the kind of the rainbow drawings, the slogans, the expressions of gratitude to the National Health Service. We've had our rituals going out and applauding in the evenings and so on. And
in another century, they might have been saints in the windows, and they might have been songs on the doors.
But also the role played by people who were motivated by overtly Christian instincts. And so the sense of a gratitude that we feel now for health service workers was kind of bound up with a sense of gratitude towards representatives of the church who were doing the same. And so I think that in a sense, because those responsibilities have been siphoned off from the churches, they've come to seem less relevant in this experience of pandemic, perhaps than they did in previous ones.
And without wishing to draw you into kind of hot water politically, the Archbishop, Justin Welby, is actually quite a neat exemplar of the kind of modern Christian in that respect, because his impulse has been to be sort of maximally obedient to those concerns, to police almost the safety requirements, keep a low profile. It's a sort of almost a stepping back, a self-abasement instinct. I don't know if how should we interpret his role and the kind of Church of England more specifically?
Well, I think that
he's very politically correct.
I think the risk for the churches, and particularly the Church of England, because it's the established church, is that with so many of its traditional responsibilities and roles taken over by various aspects of the state, the risk for the churches is that they come to seem like a kind of eccentric and not very important sub-department of the welfare state. And I agree, I think that the role played by archbishops and bishops in particular, the messages that they were giving were basically public health messages. Yeah. So that's what they were doing. But actually, if the church is to play a distinctive role, that's inadequate, because we've got professors of public health, we've got epidemiologists, we've got doctors, we've got endless people. Yeah, of course, as you know better than anyone, there are so many people who are kind of better qualified to talk about this than bishops, that really it's a kind of, what's the point of them if that's what they're going to do? And the point of them must be, if you're a Christian, that they're there to ultimately, in a state where you don't have anything else to do, to talk about all the kind of weird stuff that Christians believe. The idea that there is a kind of purpose to this, that there's a dimension that lies beyond the merely physical, that all the stuff that traditionally the churches have talked about, but which now they all seem slightly embarrassed about.
But that's so important, because I've certainly felt that this year, that the one kind of universally agreed upon moral has been life or death. And all of our public decisions have been structured around that. And it's a pretty good one. I think, most people would sign up to that. I would rather people survived than didn't. It just really laid bare to me how there aren't very many other virtues that are publicly sayable or that people widely agree on anymore. What is the value of what kind of life people are living? What is the value of beauty, of togetherness, of relationships, of, if someone who is in their 80s lives for 9 months but is able to be with their family and have a beautiful spiritual life, versus living for 12 months being stuck on their own in an elderly care home without being able to see anyone. How should we judge those two scenarios? And it's been amazingly absent for me, and maybe that's something that Christians could have done a better job.
Well, I wonder whether, Paul describes Christians as being like athletes, that you have to compete, you have to train like an athlete. And I wonder whether the mere fact over the past few decades that life in the West has been so easy, that we haven't kind of really faced massive existential crises in the way that we have this year, whether the church is like so many, like all the rest of us, in a sense, have kind of become unprepared for these kinds of crises. Because ultimately, whether you're a Christian or not, whether you admire Christianity or not, the simple historical fact is that of all the ways that humanity, over the course of its history, has devised to explain why we're here, what humanity is for, how we relate to the cosmos beyond, of all those attempts to explain it, Christianity is historically the most successful. And that success must be founded in an ability to provide satisfying answers to the profoundest questions. You know, why are we here? Why do we die? Why do we suffer? Is there life in death? You know, is there light in darkness? Is there redemption from suffering? All these kind of questions are fundamental to the Christian message, and I would have thought that there is an opportunity there for the churches to kind of examine these questions, perhaps in a more public and effective manner than. I'm aware that I may well be being very unfair here, because I know that there are plenty of people in all of the churches who have spoken very powerfully about precisely these questions and issues, but they don't. It doesn't seem to have been people that the leaders of the church. They don't seem to have seized whatever platforms they might have been given, and in fact, the exception that proves the rule to that for me is the Pope back in April celebrating a mass in a kind of empty, socially distanced St. Peter's Square against a backdrop of the sirens of people taking people to hospital. Clanging of bells, and he stopped and prayed before an icon that had come to Rome from Constantinople. It kind of opened up, I think, a sense of the richness and the depth of this Christian tradition. You know, just how much wealth, spiritual wealth, emotional wealth, moral wealth there is in this incredible tradition of people trying to make sense of these questions, you know, and it's a kind of continuum for 20 centuries. But this does not seem to me to have been perhaps the year in which
hasn't come to the fore.
Yeah.
You're a Christian?
I wrote Dominion basically because I lost my faith quite early. And essentially became a convert to the Greek gods, probably when I was about 8. And essentially, over the past 20 years, while writing about particularly the pre-Christian world of Greece and Rome, I came to feel more and more that morally and ethically I was, in fact, incredibly Christian. And that's really what I wanted to explore in it, was the degree to which almost and almost paradoxically, in a way that that the loss of faith in God is itself expressed kind of in Christian terms. That the absence that you have is shaped by Christianity, and that if that lack of belief in God is transmuted into something in which you, as a positive, then. You know, Richard Dawkins is always described as kind of an evangelical atheist, and evangelism is, euangelion. It's good news. That's what Paul and the apostles preached, and Dawkins essentially is in that sense he is an evangelist. He's saying that if you topple idols, if you purge yourself of superstition, if you come out of the darkness into the light, then you will gain salvation, you will gain redemption. And this is a message that clearly, Dawkins seems to me a very Protestant figure. This is very much in the mainstream of Protestantism, but Protestantism in turn is part of the broader Christian tradition, which goes back to, you get these same ideas in the way that the missionaries in the early medieval period are going into the dripping forests of Saxony to spread the word. And ultimately it goes back to the Hebrew prophets and their condemnation of the idols of Babylon and Egypt as stock and stone.
But you're not quite a Dawkins figure here.
No, I'm not a Dawkins figure. So
are you as you celebrate Christmas this year, do you do so in a believing Christian?
Right. So I came to realize basically that my atheism was a kind of subsection of Christianity, that it kind of related to Christianity, perhaps in the way that a thrush relates to the dinosaurs of the Mesozoic, that it's part of a kind of evolutionary continuum. And I guess that my experience of writing Dominion and reflecting on it, thinking about it over the years since, is that I've basically come to realize that all the things that I believe in, so human rights, the essential equality of human beings, the fact that there is a nobility in being human, that these are beliefs. It requires a leap of faith to believe in them. There's nothing kind of scientific or objective about any of these beliefs. And that I believe them because they stand in a line of inheritance from the Christian myth, which is ultimately a Jewish myth, that God created men and women equally in his own image, and that therefore human beings possess a particular dignity. And essentially my feeling is that if I'm going to believe in human dignity, then I might as well go full blown and believe the whole, all the stories. And I believe in it as a myth. I don't really believe in God. I find it, if I think of it in those terms, if I sit down and think, do I believe, that God, and I think of the icy immensities of space, and I think of the icy immensities of time, I find it very difficult. But if I think, Christmas and Easter basically are the times where I do really believe it, because I can believe in it as a story. I can believe in it as a kind of poem, I suppose. And I realise that that in a sense I'm culturally attuned to read it and believe in it if I operate on the level of the story, if that makes sense. It's kind of complex to explain, but that's why I think that in a sense, dwelling on do you believe in God, or do you think this, or do you think that, kind of misses the point, because I think the whole way through the 2,000 years of Christianity, actually it's kind of replicated itself as memes, if you want to put it in those terms, that it's the stories that have been the key to its success, that even now, in a kind of a Europe where fewer and fewer people are going to church or even have any particular familiarity with Bible stories, nevertheless they have an incredibly potent ability to change the way that that history operates. So why did Angela Merkel let in 1 million people into Germany who were not Christian, who were not, who were from a very different cultural background? And I'm sure that the reason for that is the kind of the heft that the parable of the Good Samaritan has in the makeup of Merkel's Protestantism. I'm sure that the openness of people to refugees in Christian societies is crucially influenced by people's reflections on the Christmas story. The idea of Mary and Joseph having no room at the inn, and I think that.
So there's almost a kind of victory whether or not you believe it. You're sort of Christian whether you want to be or not, and it sounds like you're sort of
I think that
bowing to it.
It's a question of whether you go with the grain of these stories, and I find actually that going with the grain of them it makes me happier. I feel kind of more stable in what I believe by doing that, and actually it's kind of more. It's more poetic, it's more beautiful. In a way, it's kind of more exciting to believe in things that are grounded in these kind of stories and in this sense of poetry and of kind of theological grandeur and mythology than it is just to believe in a set of abstract principles.
So this Christmas, this is my last question for you, Tom. This Christmas, after such a weird year, and it's going to be a weird Christmas, do you feel you'll be thinking differently in any way than you did last Christmas or in previous times? I mean, have the events of this year made you realise things that you didn't before?
I feel certain fundamental things more powerfully. So, of course, I will not be celebrating Christmas with my parents as I've been planning to, and so, there are reflections on death and potential bereavement that have been sharpened for me, but also my wife is a midwife, and I've always been incredibly proud of what she does and the role that she plays bringing life into the world. But of course, against the backdrop of this year where there's been so much death, the sense of what she is doing has been heightened and sharpened, and particularly at Christmas, of course. So she'll be working on Christmas Day. thinking about the story of the Nativity, thinking about life in death, thinking about birth and the role that she plays in that, I feel that my appreciation for her is definitely sharpened. It has a kind of an enhanced spiritual quality. And if she gets to see this, I'm really sorry she'll be going to be embarrassed by saying that. But I know that on Christmas when she goes out, that is definitely what I will be thinking.
Tom Holland, thank you so much and happy Christmas.
Thank you.
That was Tom Holland, historian, author, telling us about Christmas and whether or not it is actually a Christian festival. Turns out it is. I was hoping to end this with the line that we have put the Christ back into Christmas. I'm not sure that we quite managed that, but it was really interesting and enjoyable. So thanks to Tom and happy Christmas to you. This was Lockdown TV.